Welcome to Popcorn Bucket List, the show where we recommend the movies that we think you need to see in the theaters. I'm your host, Nick Dahlhoff, and I am excited to sit here and do my part in getting people back into the movie theaters. Joining me on this quest is a good friend and another movie aficionado. Some people know him as the Rye Burglar, others know him as Mr. Ryan Meyerberg.
Hello, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And with that, let's get this party started. So how the show is going to work is we're going to recap the movies that came out the previous month, kind of show the bigger highlights, both in box office and in critical response.
Yep.
And then we're going to recommend each of our own number one recommendation for that month, the number one that we think you need to go out and see. And then we'll try and preview the next month, kind of start making our own predictions, see which ones we think is going to do best and which ones might do worse, something like that. Since we're doing this a little bit later than we want to, we're going to be recapping a few months here. We're going to be recapping December and January, mainly because December is just such a big movie month.
Yes.
It has to be talked about.
Very
Some of the biggest blockbusters and Oscar contenders take place in that month. So why don't we just get this started? Ryan, why don't you start us off by talking about what we have called the big weekend of December?
All right, so for the big weekend in December, we're talking about three movies. We're talking about Mary Poppins, Aquaman, and Bumblebee, the long-awaited Transformers origin story.
And the reason why we're talking about these three in particular is because they all came out right in that peak weekend before Christmas.
That's
so this
right.
was a very competitive weekend. So we're going to kind of break down how each of them did and kind of maybe come up with a winner here. First, let's look at the critical responses. So you'll notice across the board here, there's no outliers as far as bad reviews. These are all very respectable scores overall. What would you say is the number one thing you notice looking at this chart here?
For the critical response, I thought definitely was Bumblebee with 92%. That was pretty high for I wasn't thinking it was going to be quite that high, but as you can see, it got a 92. So it was a good movie.
Yeah, as someone who is a Transformers fan, this is very nice to see. Obviously, with the previous Transformers series movies, I haven't looked at them in a while, but I think it's safe to say I haven't come close to this. I will agree with you, however, after seeing Bumblebee, overall very enjoyable film. I think still has some flaws, still some things they need to work out as far as where they go in the future. So it is interesting, a critic's score going as high as 92% for a Transformers movie. And the fan score aiming more towards a 78%, which is, I think, somewhere more relatively where we would probably place it.
Definitely, I would agree with that. Is somewhere more where I would put it individually. I did not think it was a 92, but it was definitely close to it. Yep. Very well done movie. But like you said, going into the future and how they kind of ended that movie didn't really sit super well with me. I thought just tying it in with Sam Witwicky and stuff, I didn't. Yep. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe I should revisit it. I don't know, but that was just after my first watch.
Regardless, still worth checking out, and we look forward to seeing what they do in the future. Next, I want to talk about Aquaman here. The critic score feels about right on this one. The fan score, I figured this would have been a little bit higher.
As did I.
Mainly because although Aquaman is primarily known as more of a joke in the DC Comics universe, Jason Momoa seems to have been winning fans over with his portrayal. I'll admit myself, wasn't a huge fan of him in Justice League, but really enjoyed him in this movie. And I figured the fans would have really pulled for a higher score on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you about 100% on that. Going into the movie, I didn't really think I was going to like it as much as I did. I had some of my doubts about Momoa as Aquaman, and going back to he's kind of the joke of the Justice League. I really enjoyed his character, and I thought he brought a new version of Aquaman to the screen, and I really liked it. I enjoyed it.
I think a huge shout out also goes to James Wan. Obviously, his directorial style has some really good action scenes, really good fight scenes in there. So big credit to that. But again, would have liked to see some higher scores there. Mary Poppins seems to be the closest critic and fan score as far as where they landed. One thing I will say is it is very similar to the first Mary Poppins movie. Basically, the thing I've realized is if you like the original, you're going to like this one. If you didn't like the original, you're probably not going to like this one. The songs are good, the choreography's fun, some of the acting is really good, but overall, it was just kind of a movie.
Did they have the dancing penguins in this one as well?
I believe they had the dancing penguin. There is a big animated scene in it. Next, we're going to start looking at these from a box office perspective. Obviously, money is a huge part when it comes to Hollywood movies, so this is all that really matters at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, yep.
You'll notice we have broken it down from domestic, international, and total, mainly because if you look at just the totals alone, Aquaman, pardon the pun here, blows the other two out of the water.
Yes, yep.
And it has to think largely in part because of the international box office, which can get tricky due to the fact that some movies actually premiere in the international markets earlier. Sometimes they market it way later. Deadpool 2 didn't come out internationally until a few months ago, despite the fact that it's almost been out for a year. Anything else you notice here on the box office chart?
Not really. I'm going along the same lines as you, whereas Aquaman almost tripled Mary Poppins or quadrupled Mary Poppins total. But I also agree with Aquaman has much more of a wider appeal, I think, worldwide than Mary Poppins would, and I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and even if you look at the domestic totals in general, still Aquaman the clear front runner, not even close. And one of the things that you notice, though, Mary Poppins actually does edge out Bumblebee in the domestic market here.
Yeah.
So there were people out there who decided to go to the musical instead of the Transformers movie, which
if you're with your family around Christmas time,
exactly,
some might not be old enough, and some people don't like Transformers.
You have to wonder. You have to wonder, was it the previous film's failures that made people wary to go into this one?
I just think nobody wanted to see who was the soldier guy.
Oh, John Cena?
John Cena. I don't think people want to see John Cena as another Army officer guy.
As much as I want to defend John Cena in this particular movie, it's pretty cheesy.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
You could be doing better, John Cena. I'll just say that. So looking at these three here, looking at these two charts, who would you say is a winner if you had to pick one out of this?
If I had to pick one, I would go with Aquaman, hands down. Crushed it in the world box office, or income worldwide, international. And I, to be honest, I really liked it a lot more than I was anticipating. I went into it not thinking it was going to be great, and it really kind of blew me away with, the half the movie they're underwater, and you forget that they're underwater just because. But they're not. No bubbles are coming out when they're talking. It just looks so natural, and it just fits together really well. And I that would be my top pick of those three.
I'd have to agree on that one. Obviously, box office speaks for itself. If you look at the critical reviews of it, obviously, although Bumblebee is on average ranked higher than these two, I think a lot of people had the same mindset you did, where they didn't expect much and they came out really enjoying it, which I think kind of makes these reviews speak a little bit more highly than they look on paper. So with that, for the competitive weekend, looks like Aquaman is the winner. However, that's not it for December. We're going to come back here to talk about our number one recommends. We haven't even gotten to our favorites of December yet.
No, we haven't.
So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with our number one recommends.
Staring contest! You still got it. I know.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to Popcorn Bucket List. As we mentioned before, the December month is a big time for movies.
Big time.
So we haven't even gotten to our favorite ones yet. We're gonna start doing that now. It's time for our number one recommends. Ryan, why don't you start us off? What was the December movie that you most recommend and why?
The movie that I most recommend is gotta be Vice. Dick Cheney. Who's heard of Dick Cheney? I, being 26, didn't really know much about Dick Cheney. And I went into this movie with an open mind, because what was the last film that he made? Was it
Adam McKay, are you talking
Yeah,
about?
yep.
The Big Short.
The Big Short, and I thought that was great. So I'm going into thinking I'm going to learn a little bit about Dick Cheney, maybe about why he was a good or bad vice president, and wow, my mind was blown. This guy was crazy, and let alone just the story, but how about Christian Bale's performance? Fantastic, absolutely wonderful. Just looking at him, you wouldn't know right away that was him. The way he put on, the way he talked, just everything that goes into the movie, talking about his life leading up to his chance to run as vice president with George W. Bush, and just a fantastic movie. That's my number one pick. It really, and I like it. It really emphasizes on power, like what it really means to have power. Mm-hmm. You don't have to. It's not like the old comic book days. The bigger, stronger you are, and the bigger sword you have, the more power you have. It's about these loose connections and people and how you influence stuff. And I just thought it was a fantastic movie. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about your comment on Christian Bale. I remember the first time I watched it, I actually watched this movie twice. First time I watched it, I thought one of the major things is, as he plays Dick Cheney, he does that kind of cheek thing where he always kind of like that. And I was like, does Dick Cheney do that all the time? You watch interviews of Dick Cheney, he does do that all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
nailing the head there. I've gone on record in saying this movie may be one of the scariest horror movies of 2018, just because of what they do kind of talk about. So yeah, obviously a really good movie. Again, Adam McKay, one of my favorite working directors today. He has a really interesting style. So for my number one recommend, I'm going to go a little bit more cartoony with animated movie that came out in December. That is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This was a tough choice for me at first, and then as I started thinking about it more, I thought, why wouldn't this movie be number one? Going into this year, I thought Incredibles 2 would be a shoo-in for Best Oscar for Animated Movie.
Yep.
Now, not only do I think we have a competitor here, I think we have a new clear frontrunner. Already won Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature.
That's true.
Already on track now to probably win the Oscar as well, and well-deserved. The animation style is something we've never really seen before. It seems like something we would have seen before, but is something that's creatively and comedically just challenging and inventive. It brings in all these different types of spider people from across universes that you would have never seen in a big budget movie. Overall, I think this movie just knocks it out of the park in every aspect. And with that, we've successfully wrapped up December. Now we move on to January. Now this is a month that doesn't have as much of the glitz and glamour.
That's true. That is true.
Mainly because a lot of studios try to put their stuff into December to try and get that last Oscar bid. So now this is kind of the throwaway one. So this one shouldn't take us too long to go over here. Ryan, you have a little bit of an honorable mention you want to talk about. I unfortunately haven't seen this movie. Why don't you talk to us about Escape Room a little bit here?
Escape Room, yes. Now this, I knew this movie wasn't going to win any awards. I knew it wasn't going to be groundbreaking or anything like that. However, I did find it enjoyable to watch. I personally have not done an escape room yet, but a lot of my close friends have, and from what they've told me, about how it works and looking for the clues and such, when I went and watched this movie, I really kind of thought about that, if you did end up in some sort of escape room, how would you go about trying to get out? Let alone if you don't get out, you're gonna die. That's a whole different aspect to it, but each room is very different, and in the film, all the rooms dive back onto one character, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice they made in their past. And it was kind of fun just exploring the characters and seeing why the rooms are set up the way they are because of their choices that they've made. And there's one where they are in like a psychedelic room, and the screen, it's like very Twilight Zone-y with like the screen spinning, lights flashing. It had a seizure warning at the theater that I went to and saw it. But it was a fun movie. It was a fun movie to go watch, sit through. When people get hurt, it's like, oh wow, that's crazy. So it was a fun movie to watch, and I really enjoyed it.
Obviously, escape rooms, like you mentioned, are kind of a big commodity right now. So it would make sense that Hollywood would try to capitalize on it. It is kind of an interesting premise because of that.
Yep.
So with that, we're going to jump straight into our number one recommends. Again, partially because there's not a lot that goes on in January, and we didn't get a chance to see everything. So I'll start us off. We kind of were discussing before.
Yep.
We both got some controversial picks that we're going to try to convince people of. My number one pick is the movie Glass. Now, I don't know what it is about this universe that Shyamalan has built with this unbreakable characters and everything. With the Shyamalana universe, superhero universe. But I just dive into this world every time. Even in Split, where we didn't know it was part of the Unbreakable universe yet. Even then, I was fully invested in the characters there. James McAvoy, especially. This guy,
good actor.
If he doesn't get the Oscar or nominated, he needs to get something for this role.
Yep.
A plaque. I don't care. But he puts his 100% into it. I think one thing that everyone has universally agreed with Glass is the first two acts are really interesting and have some really interesting thoughts and some really nice scenes. It's that third act that people do kind of get in a dispute over, and I have to say it didn't bother me really.
No,
I liked where he was going with that.
I did too. It kind of going along the lines of the third act. They kind of want you to think that this final showdown or battle is gonna happen this way because that's how it happens in all the superhero movies and how it's supposed to go down, and it doesn't do that at all. Like, it's that famous trope of telling you what's gonna happen and then doing it. They tell you what's gonna happen and don't do anything close to it. And I thought that was very well done, very good. I liked it because when they talk about this isn't a sequel, it's an origin story.
Yep.
And I thought that line was pretty cool, and the way it fit in with the film was really, really well done.
So yeah, regardless, even if you disagree with us with the third act, I still think it's a recommended watch just for the first 2/3 there alone. There's some really good acting and really good moments. So that's my number one pick.
And a Samuel L. Jackson fan, if you like Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, if you're a Samuel L. Jackson fan.
Check it out.
It's nice to see him return as Glass. It's nice to see Bruce Willis come back as David Dunn. It's really good to see those characters back on the screen. Yeah. So Ryan, I've done my little pitch trying to convince people of Glass. Why don't you give us your number one recommendation?
All right. My number one pick is going to slightly a little different. Did not get the best reviews, but I'm a huge Keanu Reeves fan. I like him a lot. John Wick movies, all those, love them. I went and saw Replicas, and I'm not going to say it's a great film, but it's very enjoyable. It's fun. I like that. Kind of going along with almost things like Black Mirror and Twilight Zone, and some of these where they're kind of questioning society, and it comes into, if you have the chance to save somebody's life and put them in a robot, would you do that? And we're also seeing the same things coming up with Alita Battle Angel. Is someone's life worth putting into a robot? Whether they get sick or a car accident or they're a bad person, is it okay or moral to do that? And in this story, spoilers a little bit, he kind of goes against his company he works for and turns his family after a car accident into robots. And do you try to hide that they're robots? Do you let them know that they're robots? How does it, or not, excuse me, not robots, replicas, not robots, excuse me, sorry, but I liked it. It was fun. Like I said, it was fun. Action. Keanu Reeves doing his thing, saying some great lines and fighting people. It's great. I enjoyed it.
Something to check out one of these days, hopefully. Obviously, since we're getting to this a little bit later, some of these movies might not be in theaters. Some of them are in some of the larger chains. But for those of you who do wish to watch all of our number one recommends from both December and January, Vice will be coming out on DVD on April 2nd. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse will be coming out on DVD March 19th. And it's a little early. They haven't announced the DVD releases of Glass and Replicas, but my research has pointed toward late April, around that time is probably when those will be coming out. Well, there you have it. We have given our number one recommended picks for January. And if you don't like them, then go out and see your own movies and tell us why we're wrong. Yep. Politely, though.
Very politely.
So when we come back from the break, we're going to finally start previewing February, despite the fact that it's almost over here. But we still want to talk about some of these movies here. And then we're going to give our predictions, our bets, as to which movies we think are going to succeed in February. And we'll see if we get any of them right, hopefully, in the next few weeks here.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Let me tell you about the toughest guy on earth. He does the work of 2 jobs, but only gets paid for one. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back to Popcorn Bucket List. The time has finally come to preview the month of February. And like I said before, this episode is coming out a little late, so a lot of these movies have already come out, but we would like to just give a little brief talk about them anyway. So coming out right away on the 1st of February, Miss Bala, if I'm pronouncing that right. Its star is from the show Jane the Virgin on the CW. And it really gives kind of almost like a Mule vibe to me, where it's infiltrating kind of the local Mexican drug gangs. Looks like some pretty interesting action scenes. So that might be something interesting to check out. The next week, February the 8th, that's another big weekend where we have Cold Pursuit coming out. Yet another Liam Neeson revenge movie. You think he'd be done with those by now. But this time, it's in the snow. Coming out that same weekend as Cold Pursuit is Lego Movie 2. This is obviously the sequel to the Lego Movie. Lego Movie was a huge box office hit. We'll see if the Lego Movie 2 delivers the same
should be
as well.
Should be a good turnout, I think. Should be a good turnout.
What's interesting about this weekend especially is it has movies for all types of genres. We also have Prodigy. Looks like a little bit more of a horror thriller, basically about a kid who becomes a child prodigy only for the family to learn it might be because of some dark supernatural forces. And then also coming out that weekend is What Men Want. This is the female remake of Mel Gibson's What Women Want, starring Taraji P. Henson. Then the next week is when things get a little bit more interesting. Things will be released a little bit more sporadically. On the 13th, that's a Wednesday, this February, Happy Death Day 2 You, a sequel to the horror comedy that came out a couple years ago, Happy Death Day. From what I've heard, Happy Death Day was received pretty well.
It was a surprise hit. People did not think it was going to do that well, and I think it scored actually rather well with the critics and with the fans. The fans had a great turnout and made some money.
Yeah, and it looks like just based off the trailers, this movie, well, it's repeating the day again.
Yep,
so
it's
you know what?
Happy Death Day too.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Also coming out that same day, Isn't It Romantic, starring Rebel Wilson. Now, I'll admit, this premise also really intrigues me. Basically, she gets a bump on the head, and next thing you know, you're stuck inside of a romantic comedy.
Yep.
To me, this would almost be a horror movie if I got stuck in something like that. Coming out the very next day, on Valentine's Day, the 14th, is Alita Battle Angel. You had mentioned this movie earlier on. This is James Cameron produced, Robert Rodriguez directed.
Yep.
So an interesting team there. When they put their heads together, can really come up with something pretty good there. The visual effects are obviously something to talk about with any James Cameron movie.
Yep.
So we'll have to see if.
I have a lot to talk about with this film.
All right.
I've already. I
Stay
got the
tuned for
notes.
that next month.
I got a lot to talk about with this one.
Coming out that same day, Fighting with the Family. Another interesting. This is a little bit more of a small scale. We've seen a lot of these bigger budget ones. This is a little bit more wholesome, down to earth premise, which I think will be interesting. It talks. Stars Dwayne Johnson, which is always a big plus.
Yep.
Right out of the gate, you hear a lot of people talking about how this is a big movie for WWE fans. There hasn't really been any great movies for that. So
No.
hopefully that'll maybe draw in some crowds. Maybe we'll see a good box office hit out of that there. We'll have to see.
Yep. I think any movie that the last like WWE movie I saw was years ago. Can't remember what the name of it was off my head, but they were like in a jungle, and it was just a bunch of wrestlers. And but I think this is going to be huge for them.
Yep.
Huge for them.
So yeah, we hope that one will be good. And then finally, rounding out the month, How to Train Your Dragon 3. This is the third part in the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. The first two have been well received from what I've heard. So it'll be interesting to see if they can really keep that streak going. It's really hard to land a good trilogy.
Yep.
So we'll see if these guys can maybe stick the landing, hopefully. And
Yep.
with that, we're going to go into what we like to predict for the month. How we're going to do this, we are going to place bets. We're going to place bets on which one we think is going to do the best financially and best with its critical
Review-wise.
reviews. Because with box office can be really dicey, depending on release dates, what we've decided is we'll base it solely on opening weekends. So what we think
Just opening weekend.
what we think will do the best opening weekends, essentially. Because it's really hard to judge a movie like Lego Movie 2 that comes out 3 weeks before How to Train Your Dragon
Yep.
3, who's only got a week to gain anything. If it could beat Lego Movie 2 in just a week, good on it. But Ryan, why don't you start with your box office pick?
My box office pick, I put some time and thought into this, but honestly, I think How to Train Your Dragon 3 is going to steal the box office cash because they've done it the first 2 times with their 2 movies. Yes, Lego Movie will do fairly well, and I think I'm going to tie it in with Game of Thrones. A lot of adults love Game of Thrones. If their kids want to talk about dragons, they'll take them.
You think it's going to corner that dragon market?
I think it's cornering that dragon market, which the Lego Movie did not get.
All right, so your box office pick, How to Train Your Dragon 3. I think, you mentioned Lego Movie 2, I think it's actually going to steal that animation of the month market from How to Train Your Dragon 3. And I think actually Alita is going to pull it off for the best opening weekend box office. When you have James Cameron's name on something, that tends to draw a crowd, especially because of his technical styles and his inventiveness. And Robert Rodriguez is also a name that's known to many film fans as well. So I think that's going to draw those crowds. So we'll see how things shake up here. How to Train Your Dragon 3 is coming out, so we'll have to see how that weekend really shakes up. Next, why don't you tell us what you think critically is going to do the best?
Ooh, critically, this was kind of a hard pick too. To be honest, I'm gonna go back to the Dragon market. How to Train Your Dragon 3 will get the best critic review of this month. The first 2 were great. Lego Movie's gonna be good too. But I think Alita will do fine, but I think Dragon is going to steal the show. I think Dragon is going to steal the critic reviews.
As much as I'd like to knock you down a peg and come up with a counter argument, admittedly, that was going to be my pick. And then I gave you first dibs, which I'm now regretting.
Bad move.
But
Bad move.
For my review pick, I'm going to pick Lego Movie 2. You have a very good creative team here. A lot of the same guys who were a part of Into the Spider-Verse are a part of this as well, as far as the directing team. So I think they've got a really good track record. And I think that's what's going to put it over the top as far as critic reviews go. So those are our bets. We will have to see how they shake up here at the end of the month. We'll look at start tabulating the stats, and but we'll come back and we'll see who came out on top on that one. On behalf of myself and Ryan, thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time on Popcorn Bucket List.
See you guys later.